So we passed a big milestone today, guys. We have passed 50,000 subscribers, and that's huge. So huge thanks to everyone that has joined us on this journey, that has hit the subscribe button, our Patreon supporters, our PayPal supporters, and you guys that just watch the videos. So we have a big goal of getting the channel to 100,000. Still a long way off, but we are at least 50% there. I have to say this is one of the toughest things that we have done creatively and emotionally. As a creative effort, it is a long, sustained grind. I've been taking the YouTube channel more seriously over the last 2 years, showing up every week with at least 2-3 videos. It is a lot of work to make it sustainable, but thank you guys for supporting the channel thus far. On the emotional end, it's really tough as well. I always straddle the line between making this kind of a impersonal bike channel to including our personality, our thoughts, and our feelings. When you do something like this, you put a lot of yourselves online to be vulnerable, to be criticized, to just deal with negative comments. But I think until you actually do something like this and manage a YouTube channel, a social media presence, I don't think you realize that you can have a super healthy self-esteem, but just the daily barrage of negative comments, of snipes. There's that saying, it's a death of a million paper cuts. And, one thing to keep in mind is I am a human, so I'm naturally going to respond to these things. And when it appears I'm lashing out in some way, it's because I've hit a certain limit. You have to remember, a lot of these videos I make, in our apartment. I have no coworkers to vent with. So I talk it out with Laura, but sometimes it just brims over to the video, to Instagram, and what have you. So one more thing before I do the AMA portion of the video is to let you guys know a little bit more about our Patreon. And what a lot of you may not know is that there are special perks for joining the Patreon page. We've been working with different brands that we truly like. So we're talking Swift Industries, Post Carry, Transfer Case, Soma, Velo Orange. They provided special codes, so if you are a supporter of the Patreon page, you will have access to those codes to get up to 20% off some pretty sweet stuff that we've reviewed on the channel and that we truly like. And in full disclosure, on all those discount codes, there's no pressure to purchase anything, and if you do buy something, we don't get a commission. I honestly just reached out to the people at those brands who are fans of the channel and said, hey, we've got this Patreon page, can you help us out by adding a little bit extra value? And they've come up with these codes. So for us, it's just our way of kind of saying thanks once again for being a monthly supporter. And actually, we've got some new codes on their way. We're working out a code with a website called Campfire Cycling. They're gonna be offering discounts on Tubis and Ortlieb stuff. So lots of bike touring gear, and also Silca. I am a huge fan of Silca. We reviewed many of their tools on the channel, and we're kind of finalizing what supple perk they're gonna offer to the Patreon supporters. Okay, so enough about that. If you guys wanna support some Patreon or buy a patch, all the links are in the description below as always. So let's move on to the comments. And once again, if we answer your email or your comment, be sure to email us at pathlesspedaled@gmail.com, and I will send you a sticker pack. First question is from Amit Kumar. Tips for riding in really hot conditions, please. I'm dying here in 44 degrees Celsius. Russ, help. Okay, that is really hot. So I really suffer riding in hot conditions as well. And although it seems counterintuitive, I brought this up many times on the channel, is riding in a light colored, breathable long sleeve shirt. There's a reason why, in desert survival or desert exploring, people aren't running around in tank tops. They're trying to minimize the sun exposure with these kind of long sleeve flowy shirts. So that is the first step. Cover yourself up from sun exposure. Wear something that is quick dry so you can benefit from that evaporative cooling. Another tip is just ride a little bit slower. Like one thing that we've learned over the years is that if you are riding in really hot conditions and you don't fare well, you just kind of have to knock down your typical effort. So 15% slower than you would normally be riding during the hottest part of the day. Another tip is if you're riding and you stop to take a break, This seems obvious, but do it in the shade and remove your helmet. A lot of your body heat is trapped in your head, so any chance you get to stop and take a break, make sure you truly take a break, do it in the shade, remove that helmet, kind of vent off the excess heat. Other things we've done in the past is ride with an insulated water bottle with ice water and kind of squirt ourselves down during the day with quick dry clothing that kind of helps cool the body down. Okay, next comment, Cyborg Taco. Do you ever get anxiety about getting out there to ride? For example, worry about getting hit by a distracted driver and then just not going out. This is a true concern, and my answer is yes. I think when we first started touring and just getting into bikes in general, it was over a decade ago, and while there were smartphones, they weren't as prevalent today. So I think the landscape has definitely changed. So there are times when I've just not wanted to deal with traffic and have ended up not riding. Fortunately, here in Missoula where we live, there are tons of gravel roads, tons of trails that lead to those gravel roads. So typically, more often than not actually, we'll ride those routes instead of being on the road. If you don't have that option, the other thing you could do is just ride when you know it's gonna be less busy. So if it's busy during the week, riding during the weekend, or if it's popular recreational route on the weekend, trying to ride there really early morning in the week. Another big thing is to find friends to ride with. There is that kind of feeling of safety in numbers, and it helps create mutual motivation. So trying to find a riding buddy. BD1 and William McCutcheon, they asked tips on pathfinding. What program apps do you use to plot routes? And what's your method of route planning? So there are many apps and websites out there, everything from Strava, Komoot, Ride with GPS. Our preference is Ride with GPS. They've got a great feature. If you've not used it, you hop on their website, type where you want to ride, and it will give you a list of ambassador routes. So these are routes that people have vetted. Some of them have really fleshed out descriptions with the water stops, food stops, where they camp and all that stuff. And I've found comparing that kind of data here, at least in the United States, comparing it to Komoot, the Ride with GPS stuff is way more fleshed out. In terms of planning routes, they've got the best, in my opinion, route planning system. Super easy to draw a map. You can also do it in a satellite mode with using Google Maps, so you can see if it's paved or unpaved. You can drop down into Street View and get a sense if there's a shoulder or not. And if you pay for their upgraded route creation tools, you can do things like break up a multi-day route. You can color code certain parts of the route and denote them as gravel or whatever. You can also export cue sheets, so super fully featured and pretty easy to use. They've got a YouTube channel themselves with lots of help videos on how to plan your own route. So I definitely suggest checking out Ride with GPS if you haven't already. David Creekmore asked, carbon gravel bikes are increasingly popular, it seems. A lot of folks want inexpensive bikes, which means aluminum. I know you prefer steel, but can you go over the pros and cons of the different materials as you've experienced them on review bikes? There's a lot of steel dogma in the gravel world. Steel might be better much of the time, but is there room for carbon and aluminum? All right, so this is a really big question. I'll try to give you guys the highlights. So first off, the big thing to keep in mind is with all those materials, carbon, steel, or aluminum, there's gonna be varying levels of quality with each of those materials. So it's not a blanket, steel is better, carbon is better, aluminum is better. There's really cheap steel and really nice steel, and there's really cheap carbon, and there's kind of more sophisticated carbon. I'll give you kind of my impressions having done all these test bikes with the different materials, however. First off, carbon. Carbon tends to be the lightest material. It also, in my opinion, tends to be pretty stiff. I think a lot of the carbon gravel bikes that we're seeing still have lots of remnants of road bike philosophy, meaning stiffer is better, is faster. So in my experience, the racier carbon gravel bikes just feel like road bikes with bigger tires. So yes, they do benefit from some compliance with a wider tire. Generally, the frame material itself, not so supple. Another downside is many carbon gravel bikes, they tend to skimp out on the fork. So you'll see forks that either just have eyelets for fenders. Many of them won't take a front basket because the complexity that tends to add to the carbon fork design. So that is definitely a downside of carbon. In terms of aluminum, there are a couple aluminum bikes that we've ridden that we really liked. The Spooky that we rode was super light. I would say still on the stiffer side, but man, that thing really accelerated. We also really like the 2016 aluminum Warbirds. They had those nice flexi stays, so I felt that did actually buy some compliance in a aluminum frame. In terms of steel, I think one of the big benefits is the steel forks, they tend to have all the braids on, so they really win in terms of utility. Some of the bikes, not all the bikes we've tested, have used a thinner wall diameter tubing, and you get that kind of cool springiness from a steel bike, but that is not always the case. It's actually pretty rare in my experience. Another big benefit of steel bikes is, if you tend to travel or beat up your bikes, you don't have to baby them as much as you would if you had a carbon bike. That kind of day-to-day durability is pretty nice. So those are big broad strokes. I've ridden fun bikes in each material type, and I can't say that one material type is necessarily better all the time for all bikes under all conditions. I do have a preference for steel, mostly because of the durability and because if you get a nice steel, it can actually be a pretty springy ride. All right, next question is from our Patreon group. Sean Anderson asks, can you explain what a Dropbar mountain bike is and how the feel is different from a gravel bike? So to me, a Dropbar gravel mountain bike tends to have a longer wheelbase, which lends to more stability, especially on high-speed descents. They also tend to have a more relaxed steering geometry that holds its line and doesn't get deflected when you hit a rock. A good example of this is the Salsa Cutthroat. And with that bike, the front end, the stack, also tends to be generally a little bit higher, so you can be in the hooks most of the time. Contrast that with a gravel bike, which depending on the design DNA may be derived from an endurance road bike or a cross bike. Those bikes generally have a little bit lower stack, so a little bit more aggressive, more road-like geometry. They often, but not always, tend to have a shorter wheelbase, be a lot more twitchy, a lot more responsive, and while they can handle rough descents, they might not be the most confident descender when things get really chunky. So Sean, I hope that basically helps kind of decipher it a little bit. Jeffrey Trudell asks, Expedition versus Overnighter. So good question, Jeffrey. If you asked us this a couple years ago, it would have been Expedition. But right now, we're really big fans of the Overnighter, just because Laura's holding it down 9 to 5 at ACA, and that's what we can fit into our lives at the moment. And for me, I like it because I'm constantly testing and playing with different types of bikes and gear. And by going out on these short trips, I can cycle through a lot of gear and get a sense of if they're good or not and share it with you guys. Robert Strickland asks, what's a dream ride or tour that you've yet to undertake? So we've got a long list and it varies on different types of rides. We've heard a lot about the Mickelson Trail. I've never really done a lot of riding in South Dakota, so I want to go check that out. We've done zero riding in Colorado, and I always see these epic climbs on Instagram in that area, so we want to check that out. We'd love to go to Argentina and base camp someplace with lots of gravel and fishing and just spend a month exploring gravel loops and doing fly fishing and making videos for you guys. We actually like climbing. You wouldn't believe it by the way we look, but I do love a good climb. So ticking off things like Mount Lemmon down in Tucson, Gibraltar Mountain Road in Santa Barbara, Glendora Ridge Road. I'd love to make a YouTube video on all these epic climbs. Probably won't be stealing any KOMs like Phil Gaiman, but we'll have our own spin on it. So again, if we answered your question or responded to your comment, please email us at pathlessspelled@gmail.com and we will get you a sticker pack. And for you guys, and for the rest of you guys, thank you so much for joining us on this journey, for supporting the YouTube channel. It really wouldn't be possible without your support, without the kind comments and the encouraging emails and everything. I think I would have given up a long time ago. So with all that said, keep the supple side down.